Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present two people who are very well known and widely respected throughout the entire music industry, but especially here in Nashville. The marks that these two have made on this town are indelible, and I am so pleased to feature them today. And I promise you will leave here smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. And in this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of the opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, and this is very important, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. Your default setting is probably just host and speakers, so please make sure you change that. I want to thank our program sponsors. Without their support, we could not do this for free. Special thanks to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and Better Than Booze. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Wes Vause. For more than 30 years of experience in the country music industry, Wes brings a vast knowledge of publicity experience to the community as both an independent and record label publicist. A CMA board member, he founded Press On Publicity in 2022, a boutique PR company that manages the PR for artists such as Blake Shelton, Parmalee, Jonas Group Entertainment, and many more. Before Press On Publicity, Wes spent over 20 years leading publicity campaigns for artists and corporations at record labels. In 2000, he joined Country Music Hall of Fame member Joe Galante, remember that name for later, guys, at the RCA label group, now known as Sony Music Nashville. He was instrumental in the success of artists including Kenny Chesney, Martina McBride, Chris Young, Miranda Lambert, and so many others. In 2014, Warner Music Nashville chairman and CEO John Esposito hired Wes as senior vice president, where he led the public relations campaign for all of their artists and corporate communications. The Warner Music Nashville roster ranges from superstars to breakouts, including Chesney, Shelton, includes Dan and Shay, Gabby Barrett, Cole Swindle, Brett Eldridge, Cody Johnson, Ashley McBride, and others. Welcome, Wes. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
And joining Wes as our featured guest is none other than Joe Galante. When the RCA Records transferred Joe from New York to its Nashville office in 1974, he never imagined he'd still be in Music City 49 years later. Nashville certainly had no clue how the 24-year-old New Yorker would transform the country music industry, becoming the longest tenured major label head in its history. During his 39 years with what is known as Sony Music Nashville, Joe displayed marketing acumen, strategic sense, and a tenacious competitiveness that motivated other labels and raised the bar for the industry at large. Joe was 32 when he took the helm at RCA Nashville, the youngest person to ever lead a major label's Nashville division. And under his leadership, RCA became the country's top label in 1982, and a spot that they held for 11 years hence. He shepherded the multi-platinum ascendance of Alabama using a pop marketing model. He signed a diverse roster of talent, including Clint Black, Kenny Chesney, Sarah Evans, Vince Gill, the Judds, Martina McBride, Lori Morgan, KT Oslin, Carrie Underwood, Keith Whitley, Chris Young, and many others. In 2006, Joe oversaw the evolution of BMG Nashville into Sony BMG Nashville with the addition of former Sony Nashville and its Columbia Nashville imprint with artists such as Miranda Lambert, Gretchen Wilson, and Montgomery Gentry. Joe has been a member of the Country Music Association Board of Directors since 1978 and CMA Foundation Board of Directors since 2011, serving as chairman of both organizations. He was also founding member of Leadership Music, now in its 33rd year. Since leaving Sony Music Nashville, Joe has served as a mentor in residence for the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, where he founded Project Music. He's chaired the Music City Music Council, a group of leaders dedicated to further establishing Nashville's position as a global music capital. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars here today. Gentlemen, please take it away.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Wesley?
All right. Hey, Joe. This is an honor and a pleasure.
I'm glad it didn't come out another way.
Well, Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Do you make any resolutions or put anything on the bucket list?
Try to be more positive.
That's a good one.
How
Well,
about you? Did you have anything?
I don't really do resolutions. I try to self-correct all the time, which takes effort. I need to do that
I've been
constantly.
with you on a couple of those corrections.
Yeah, you have. So just love more, live more, say yes more.
Okay, I'm gonna remember the
Say
last
yes
part.
Yeah, say yes more. Oh, yeah. I think that's how I got here.
Good point.
Well, as Tom said, yeah, I've known you well for 25 years when I went to work at RCA, but actually knew you were a little longer. My first internship was at RCA in 1985, and probably had some nervous elevator rides with you at the time. I was a 19-year-old kid. So, but as I was thinking about all this, you've really been impacting. I'm a huge country fan. I have been growing up in Tallahassee, Florida, but you've been impacting my life since the 70s, since you moved here in 74, and started working here with these incredible artists. And as we look back on that roster, Waylon Jennings, Ronnie Milsap, Charlie Pride, Jerry Reed, Dolly Parton. I mean, they're icons, but at that time they were just trying to make their way and just getting started, as were you. So what was it like just being in the trenches and working on a daily basis with these now icons?
Well, I think that the thing that we have today is information, and back then we didn't have any information. I mean, you just kind of looked at the Billboard chart. Well, you had all those charts, Record World, Cashbox, Gavin, and they could be largely influenced. So you really didn't know what you had in terms of a record because there were no sales charts. So, as was the case, you could ship 100,000 units and get 150,000 back because of free goods, the bonus goods that people were using as discounts. So that was very inaccurate information. And largely it was more cottage industry. I mean, country, unless you had a pop crossover, the Johnny Cashes or the Eddie Arnolds or whatever. Most people, unless you were in the Southeast, Southwest, and a little bit of the Midwest, they didn't know what you were talking about.
Mm.
And if I remember back at the old RCA building, the first time I went into a meeting, we had this windowless conference room, which is Javelina right now. And it was designed so that you could go in there and play the lacquers, which we used to have. People would come in and play the music, and it was pretty much soundproof. It was also like being in a witness protection program. You felt like, there's no light in here or anything, but the room was full of A&R people. We had 5 staff producers, and then we had Jerry and Chet. And if you were in promotion or marketing, they were asking you questions. And how come you're not getting this record played? How come you're not getting? But nobody had any understanding of what it took to get anything played. And back then, we knew a record was being played because we would get the charts from the radio station. They would mail us their charts. Somebody would go through, and we would find out from that. Somebody would type. We used to have a secretary that would go in there and type all that stuff out. Aside from the national charts, we would know which stations we were on based on that. None of that was accurate. So
were the charts, were they weekly at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It used to be the country and western charts too.
Country and western.
Yeah, I never got.
Yeah, and you didn't even have a fax machine in the 70s.
No. It was, It was all, but it was a fun time at the same time because we had a coffee room, a little break room on the second floor when you came into the building. And you'd go in there and Chet would be having coffee and, Bob Ferguson would be over there and then Waylon would walk in, songwriters would come in, Cash was in there one day. And it was a little tiny room, but people knew, well, you can go in there and who knows who's going to be in the room. And there was no such thing as a series of meetings, what is today the modern record company, where you guys are going from one Zoom or one meeting to another. Didn't exist. We had one weekly meeting,
Right.
and I don't
And
think we
that
got shit done.
that old building, and it was connected to Studio A and Studio B, right?
That's correct.
So
So
I'm
for
sure there were constantly artists coming in and out recording.
Yeah, and if you wanted to go down, you went down to the studio, Chet or Jerry could be working at the board and go in. And if you had a question, not normally for Chet, more so for Jerry.
Right. But so what were did the artists come in much? Did Waylon come in for meetings? Did Charlie Pride come in for meetings?
Charlie and Ronnie were more to be on premise. Whalen had an issue with the way the studio was run and the on-the-clock engineers because they were all union people and was not a big fan. In fact, of all the time that we were there, Ramblin' Man was the only thing that he recorded in the RCA studio. I mean, aside from the very early stuff. But after that, he was recording at Glazer Brothers or over with Jack Clement. He was not somebody that dropped by often. And if he did, you were sure what was going to happen.
Right.
And then Dolly would come in occasionally, but most of the time, early on, it was Porter that was showing up speaking for Dolly, and then Dolly had the meeting with us saying, "Hey, I'm leaving Porter," and then Porter burst into the room, and all hell broke loose, and Dolly went on her way and wound up signing with Sandy Gallen.
Man, you were in the room for that.
Yeah, yeah, that was a moment. I'm going to leave it just there.
Sure. Yeah, I understood. And you went on the road with Dolly, right? That you guys would do promo tours.
Yeah, in fact, one of the early things that I did was kind of fun. Uh, I mean, Jerry never wanted to be on the road. He wanted to be in Nashville, never wanted to go anywhere. Um, and so there was the Felt Forum connected to Madison Square Garden. The small room was going to be a show. It was Charlie Pride, Bobby Bear, and Dolly was opening. So they booked the promo excursion to go on the Long Island Railroad from Jamaica in Queens all the way out to the end of the line. And she would go out in a flatbed truck, just her and a guitar, and she would sing Love is Like a Butterfly or, Jolene, whatever. And it was probably a minute and a half because of the fact that that's how long it took to get people on and off the train. You kept the schedule. And so we did that probably for 5 hours. Judy, her hair and makeup person, and then Dolly and I. And we spent the entire day together that way. And then on the way back, obviously there are no stops. So I got to know Dolly really well.
That's incredible. And I just saw pop up in the chat that today is Ronnie Millsap's birthday.
Oh, all right. Have to reach out.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So 80s come along. What year does Jerry retire?
Jerry retired in 1982.
And that's when you became president of the company.
No, actually, I didn't become president until 83 because there was a momentary um, Jerry told me, I still remember where I am on Sixth Avenue. We had left the RCA building, 1133. We're walking back to the hotel, and we're on Sixth Avenue right outside the Diamond District. And Jerry said, "I'm leaving." And whenever Jerry wanted to tell you something, he never looked at you. He kind of did this whole thing. And so I knew this was not going to be good. And he said, "I'm leaving." And I said, "Okay, so am I getting the gig or what?" He said, I haven't told them a whole lot of what you've been doing, so it may be a bit there. And that's what happened. I mean, they didn't know what actually I was doing. So it took them probably about 9 months before I was actually appointed.
Okay. And what was your first signing as president?
Oh, God. Gus Harden. I'm going to say she was an earlier version of Gretchen.
Okay.
I mean, she was out there and she was mixing it up, and she was a great singer, but she had a crazy husband,
Mhm.
and she was a bit off the rails too. And so
Was
that
she?
was the first one, and we had one top 10 record, and boy, did we fight to get there, and then it was pretty much over after that. And but the next one, I redeemed myself with the Judds.
Yes, yeah, that's a good redemption. Did they actually come in your office and
Yes.
play for you?
Yeah, I mean, what the story was that I was out in LA with Randy Goodman, and we had just gotten through um, the ACM party and at the La Park Hotel. Some of the people on the call that I've seen shown up know the hotel. It's a little suite hotel, and it was really kind of cool. And so Dick Whitehouse, who ran Curb Productions, he and I have been trying to do business forever. And so he came into the room, and we were talking about things, and he was about to leave, and he said, and by the way, I've got this mother and daughter. And he said, I'd really like you to hear it. And I said, well, what do you got? He says, I just have a work tape. Take out the old Sony Walkman, put it on, and I heard that, and I said, don't bring this anywhere. Just, I was leaving. It was a Friday. I said, when can you do this? He said, on Tuesday. I said, okay, come on in on Tuesday. And sure enough, Winona with her braces, and Naomi came in, sang. Brent was there, Don Potter, Dick, and then they walked out, and I called right away and said, we're doing this deal. John Mason was the attorney, and we got it done the same day.
So
I
you
mean,
just
that,
signed
that
it
was
right
the
there.
reality. You could do things back then where you go, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Okay, we're done.
Yeah, how involved was New York and corporate in Nashville in the 80s? Were they still at a arm's length?
Yeah. I mean, but we we slowly took it back. First thing we started taking back, A&R, they left you alone because the deals weren't out of line. If you went above a couple hundred
Mm,
$1,000 for a resigning, everybody got involved. But you didn't have those kind of deals early in the 80s. We weren't selling enough music to really, multi-million dollars were not the norm. So
right.
they were arm's length, and then little by little, we kept fighting until we became a self-sustained P&L probably in 86. And then we had, full funding for everything we needed to do, and we were responsible for making it work or not making it work.
Well, just looking over this roster, it's incredible, and it's no wonder that you guys end the decade as label of the decade because it is Alabama, and the Judds, and Keith Whitley, and KT Oslin, Kenny Rogers, Restless Heart, Clint Black, Earl Thomas Conley, Eddie Rabbitt, who he had 20 something hits, number ones. Lori Morgan, I mean Sylvia, those were just hit makers.
Yeah. But to be fair and kind of be honest here, I think you remember the exercise we did where I put everybody up on the board that we had signed that missed. And
Right.
then we had the ones that didn't make it, and it was kind of lopsided.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of things that did not work. And you always got to hit more than you miss. And as long as you get the right ones, you cover a lot of those misses. But the ones we got, yeah, we built a catalog from that.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I saw actually Billboard released year in from last year, and catalog wise, Sony Nashville was number one. So I'm sure that catalog still has such a huge bearing on that.
Well, you think back to when we wound up taking over Columbia, because the Arista catalog was largely the Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn, all that stuff was
Yeah.
great, but the the Sony catalog with the Willie Nelsons that completed the entire catalog was there between the RCA stuff and then what was on Columbia. All the Dolly catalog, Lynn Anderson, I mean George Jones, Merle Haggard, and all the things that we had as a label, from Charlie to Eddie Arnold to Jim Reeves to Waylon. I mean, all that came together at one time. It's probably was 2/3 of what was going on in the business in terms of the history of country music, with MCA really taking on another big part of it.
Right. Well, one of the signings that you did, KT Oslin, I mean, that was so left of center. How did you just know that in your gut this is going to work?
Well, Harold Shedd came into the office, and of course, we were back at the old cassette days. And he brought a cassette in, and he played me 80s Ladies And I said, okay, who is this? I want to know. And he wouldn't tell. I almost felt like it was the old Charlie Brown days. He said, well, she's a little older and she's from New York, but really, she's from Arkansas. And, she's just a great writer, been doing some things on Broadway, and would not give me a picture, would not give me age, would
Mhm.
not give me anything. Not that age was important, but he didn't have a bio or anything. It was just all, you remember, everybody would sit down and we'd talk and go. I said, okay, well, when can I meet her? He said, well, let me set up a lunch at Maud's. So all I knew was this woman was a bit older, and I walked into Maud's, and KT was at the table, and I was taken back for a second because older was not what I was thinking. I mean, she was 42 at
She's in
that
the
point.
40s, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And she sat down, I sat down and I stuck out my hand and she said, hi, I'm KT. And from that point forward, I mean, we became almost like family. She was in my life and our lives on a personal level with Franny and myself, and coming over for holiday parties and everything else. And she was exceptional, exceptional.
She really was. Her time, I think, was short, as far as on this in the genre, but it was so impactful.
Yeah. Well, I
So
think that the word indelible, there were
indelible.
so many people that came in after her that I remember Martina was having a bit of success at that point, but not a lot. And we did a party, and KT, it was the goal party for KT, and Martina showed up and she just wanted to meet KT. She just loved the way she performed and the way she sang, the way she wrote. And I think that KT spent all that time, the initial part of writing those songs, and it was an unbelievable collection in terms of the greatest hits. But she didn't want to do all the rest of the stuff. She loved
Right.
performing, and if she could have done that, it was a different time in terms of the business. It was a lot tougher for her at that point because she was starting to get to be 47, 48, 49, and it was a young person's game still at that point. But still, I mean, you remember we went out to the Franklin Theater and saw her perform, and she still kicked ass. I don't
She
care.
did, but
Yeah. And then when
she
she was in assisted living, she was still doing concerts for people.
she had so much personality, but she had no tolerance for bullshit.
Oh God. But she was funny. She I honestly thought at one point she was going to be the host of the CMA Awards because she off the cuff, she was just so spontaneous.
She could have done it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So into that decade, you look back, and before we leave the '80s, which I hate to do because I did have a head full of hair then.
Mister.
Mister, yes, me and Franny.
Yeah, I love that picture of the two of you guys rocking all that hair, boy. I'm
Actually,
glad nobody took. Yeah. Oh, you got? Oh, that's great.
yeah. Uh, but so how do you look back over that decade of the '80s? To me, it was such a golden decade. How do you feel like the music stands up?
Oh, every time I hear those songs come through, I mean, I give all, well, the credit goes to the artists, the songwriters, the producers, and all the players because they are still identifiable today. And I think when Robert did the CMA 50th, and we started with all the women, a lot of that was from the 80s, and they just walked out there and people love those songs and they love those artists, and they still do today, as you said before, in terms of what shows in terms of the market share.
Right, absolutely. And then the '90s come along, and pretty quickly, big changes for you. You head back to New York.
Yeah.
Did you have?
Before we leave
Yeah,
the 80s though, I
yeah.
have to say that I think all those artists, the old 10,000 hours, I mean, they did more than 10,000 hours to get there. Nobody got there off of data. I mean, they did it through blood, sweat, and tears. And I think the town, I always remember fondly how I see Tim Whipperman's on there too. We all used to politic for songs. I mean, songs, it wasn't really from the writing from the artists. We never, most of the time you sign artists, they weren't writers. And, they became writers in some cases, and some people thought they were writers, but were never really writers. And I'm not sure that was a plus, because I remember some of the records that we made when we got into those arguments, it really, or discussions,
Right.
it didn't help the quality of the record. And the town, to me, that was the golden era of the songwriter. And those songs led people down. I mean, Martina's a prime example of that. You know, she's a great singer, but man, what great songs to accompany that. Okay, so I go to New
Absolutely.
York.
Yeah, you got to wait before though. You
Oh,
you made me remember something. I've always wanted to ask you. "Safe in the Arms of Love." That song. It was on a Gail Davies did like a duet kind of thing. It was on that record. Then it was on a Martina record. Boy, you must have loved that song.
yeah. And that was, we were struggling still at that point with Martina. I mean, I still remember the promotion guys going, "They claim she screams." You're going,
I remember that.
oh God, who am I going to kill first, the promotion department or the radio guys? But, Safe in the Arms of Love was one of those records that she was able to demonstrate her vocal prowess and at the same time prowess and get across the threshold. And then people started to open up to her. And it was such a great record. It was a great video at the same time. And yes, video at that point was important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that song with Gail Davies, I think they were called Wild Choir.
They
That
were.
video is still on YouTube, so you should go find it because it's a hoot. It's a hoot to look
Yeah,
at.
I remember paying for
Yeah,
it. and Gail and I had
$15,000. What
yeah,
was
we
it
were
then?
arguing at that point about, because Gail was, I mean, the cover was great. She made a great record. She really did. But, we didn't get very far.
Yeah, it was cool. Maybe too cool, actually.
There is that.
All right. Yeah. All right. So 1990, New York calls you back. Did you did you hesitate to leave Nashville, or you just
Oh, yeah.
duty called and it was time to go?
Yeah. In fact, at that time, I was reporting to Michael Dorneman, the CEO of all the labels, and he came down to spend the weekend, and I took him up to Center Hill, and we were having a good time. And at that time, Bob Buziak was president of RCA Records, and Franny, we were all there. We went out the boat and came back in, and then we got back into town. And I had told Franny before that, I said, it's not like Michael to come down. There's something going on here. And when he left, I thought, well, if he was going to ask something, he would have asked. And I told Franny, I said, we're good, because we were getting married in about 90 days because it was summer. And so I went into the office. He left on the Sunday morning. I go in the office on the Monday, and I got a call from HR and said, Michael wants you to come to New York. And I went, why? And they said, just come tonight. Don't tell anybody and get on the plane. He'll meet you. I can't remember where it was, Le Cirque or whatever the heck it was. And so we're at dinner, and Michael says, hey, I want you to be in charge of the company. I said, well, wait a minute. My boss is Bob Buziak. We just spent the weekend with him. He said, he's not going to be there. So you have tonight to decide. Tomorrow morning, I felt like I was in the Godfather movie. Either your signature's on here. I was like, what? And I was just young enough at that point. I mean, the compliment about the 32-year-old is true, but I hadn't had enough experience to know nothing. None of us in Nashville had contracts. Everybody was at will.
Mm.
And so, you're going to sign a contract, and you're going to go up there, and this is what it's going to be. And you got to make the decision. And, I thought, well, I'm from New York. How bad can it be, kind of thing, but you don't have the chance to make any phone calls to go, how bad is it?
Right.
And I had a lot of friends in New York, and, I made the decision, obviously. And the next day they went in there, and I flew back the next night because I had no clothes. I wasn't prepared to do anything. I thought I was coming up for a business meeting and leaving. And so it went down. And then, of course, I was going up on a weekly basis and kind of running both places, and they fired Bob the next day.
Wow.
So it was like, okay. And so it was, and we were in terrible shape. You know me, and I used to stay at the hotel across the street from the office. And I had two whiteboards in this little suite that they gave me. And I got up one night because I couldn't sleep. There was so much stuff going on. And I started looking through all the contracts, and I started writing down all these artist names because I couldn't find any of this stuff. Nobody could consolidate anything. Everything was in binders at that point. And I realized we had 90 artists. That wasn't counting the jazz label. And a lot of these deals were we're going to deliver you an album this year and you're going to pay X. So the next morning I got up and I took my little sheets off the whiteboard and I went to the CFO, Tom McIntyre, and I said, you got some scotch tape? He said, yeah. And I started putting them all around the room. And he said, what are these? I said, these are the deals that you signed. I said, do you see all this stuff? There's no place for us to put this stuff out. They're all output deals because at that time, in order to forecast a business, people would go through and they'd say, well, I'm going to sign 10 acts and they're going to do 100,000 units. Okay. You add that up, it's $10 million. And then, because we had no billable, I mean, Bruce Hornsby, Michael Penn, that was pretty much it. There wasn't a whole lot of billing. So in the next couple of weeks, I dropped 65 artists, flew out to LA, did it in New York. We paid the deals off. We got out of the deals. 5 of those artists were signed by other labels. Nothing broke through. All of the other artists went away. Oh, I forgot. We had Mr. Mister, but there was no follow-up. That's right. We had Mr. Mister.
Right. Mr. Mister. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 60 artists never found a deal.
65. Yeah.
Yeah. 65. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because there's only one pipeline at that time, right? I mean, you have to put out a physical album.
Yeah. And we didn't have a great A&R department. Our success at that point was, like I said, Hornsby, and Hornsby decided that he didn't want to be a popular artist. He wanted to make more jazz. So we were getting into that, okay, can you give us one that kind of works down the center? But I mean, we were able to work with Bruce. Michael Penn was difficult to deal with, and we never quite got back what we had in, the first album. And then we were living off to a certain degree. Dirty Dancing, that was still a catalog item in the catalog itself. And then Nashville was providing the bulk of earnings.
Right. Wow. One thing I remember, talking about Bruce Hornsby, one thing I remember that you've said for so long is it's the music business. You got to have both. It's the music business, for God's sakes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, New York was driven, it still is to a degree, lawyers. Nothing against lawyers, but there wasn't the connection. It was always about, who's got that relationship and can you get in the pipeline of this? And it was hard. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we wound up doing the Reality Bites soundtrack. The guy that was in charge of soundtracks for us out in the coast, Marty Olnick, he did a yeoman's job. Nobody wanted to do business with us because we were like last place.
Right.
And most of the labels, as you know, Warner's gets their soundtracks from Warner Pictures. MCA Pictures at that point was giving it to the labels. So we were on the outs. We didn't have a film studio. And Reality Bites came up and Marty called me and he said, here's the amount of money they want. And everybody in the label has passed. None of the labels want it. So it's ours. And we got first shot. I said, we'll take it. And, we went on that year and did 1.5 million units, and Ron Fair was the producer on that and did a spectacular job putting records together, and that led us to Dumb and Dumber. And again, so some of our stars were that, because it took us a while to get to the point where we were sitting down and Dave Matthews came in and SWV came in, and we started Wu-Tang. I mean, that took a moment until you make the rounds, as a couple of times, and people go, he's not such a bad guy. The company's doing some things. I'll give you a shot. You're paying for it, obviously.
Right.
But we got the shots.
And are you still keeping in touch with Nashville? Are you having much to do with it? Are you just so focused on New York right now?
No, I was having calls with the guys, and I was back down here on a regular basis. I was probably down here once every 6 weeks, but as I learned, and I've told people who are in the present job, you can't do this by remote control. You got to be present. So I was going back and forth between LA and New York and Germany. And then, we actually were launching like ZZ Top. I went around to all the European countries. We stopped in every city, Randy and I, and inhaled too much smoke playing ZZ Top music in all those conference rooms. But that's what you were. You were on the road. I just wasn't visiting radio stations.
Right. Did you stay on the CMA board even in that time you were in New York?
I resigned for 2 years. I was on for the first year, and then I resigned the 2 years later for 2 years, and then I came back on when I came back into Nashville.
Okay. So you come back in 1995, and I mean, there are some good things on the label. You've got Mindy McCready. Well, what was your first signing when you came back to Nashville?
Mindy,
Oh, it was
Mindy.
Mindy.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And that was, David he brought her in, and again, the music was pretty spectacular. She came in, you worked with her. That was one of your early artists too. She was engaging,
Yes,
and
she was.
yeah, and there was, we put together, I think, a great record. Obviously, we wound up almost doing 2 million units with her,
Huge.
but she did not want to work, as you remember.
Yeah.
I
Man, in
don't
this
want to,
business.
yeah, I don't want to disparage anybody's memories, but she did not
Right.
want to work, and there were more lies than I could count.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I,
and it's 80% drive in this business,
yeah,
right? I mean,
I remember calling Randy Hoffman and dropping her 2 days after the album debuted because I'd have to call everybody in the building a liar or call her the liar. And that's what I told Randy. I said, either everybody in the building's lying to me or she is, because
yeah.
non-performance, not showing up for dates. I mean, her first tour was George Strait. Second tour was Tim McGraw. And Tim McGraw
Yeah,
fired her.
he did. And who signed John Anderson?
I did. And that was because of David Conrad. Conrad brought that in. And he came in and he said, we're Dire Straits. They love John Anderson, and Mark wants to work on the record. And I mean, who's not a John Anderson fan? And I mean,
Absolutely.
Seminole Wind. I mean, that was another, getting repetitive.
Straight Keela Nights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great songs, great singer, great production. Yeah, seems to be a formula there somewhere.
Yeah, there does. I see Tim Whipperman's on here, and
Yeah.
Tim says he and David Conrad were roommates, and he also asks who was your mentors back in that time.
Well, at that time, Frances Preston, who ran BMI,
Sure.
was in town, my mentor. If I had an issue or a problem, she was great. And in New York, she was the same one. When I moved to New York, Frances was a tremendous ally, introducing me. I got on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame board with her. Martell. I mean, she was fabulous. I mean, she could have taught a master class in being a mentor. And then in New York,
Absolutely.
the guy that got me out of finance and got me into promotion and marketing was a guy named Frank Mancini, who was running the promotion department, and he had been there for not in promotion in New York, but had been over at MGM. He had been over at Decca, and had gone back and worked with Connie Francis and a bunch of other people. And he was running at that time promotion. All the departments reported into New York, so it was rock, it was country, it was R&B. I know that's not the term, but I mean, everything reported into him. And he was terrible at math. And so I would help him with budgets, and he would help school me about what was going on. And I used to just, when I was done at the end of the day of my job, I go sit in his office, and I take the late train back home to Long Island. But I learned, and then he got me a job in the promotion department and marketing department. That's
Nice.
how I got to finance. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the 90s, as I said, RCA label of the decade in the 80s, not the 90s. I think really MCA sort of ruled that decade. So when you come back, it's really about planting seeds for what's going to be the 2000s, because the seeds that you're planting are Martina, Lone Star, Kenny Chesney, Sarah Evans. So here you are at the end of the 90s, and you look back, how do you reflect on that decade, everything that happened, taking into account New York and then back to Nashville?
Again, it was another transition, because I remember coming back here, and we were here a couple of months, and I had lunch with somebody, and people said they don't think you can do it. It's a different world now. You can't do that, which just fired me up at that point. And that's when we came up with the bus tour, and I went out on the road with the heads of promotion and Randy, and we went across the country on a tour bus, playing, going in, pulling in radio station parking lots, bringing everybody out, playing the music, have a discussion with them. I mean, we did that for 12 weeks around the country, which really changed our interaction because radio was the pipeline. First I went out and I started meeting people and saying, well, what's missing? One of the things that came out of that was, the stars become stars, but they don't come back out to see us. And as you remember, that's when I started going out with all the stars and saying, you need to come out there. We need to do some visits to the radio stations when we launched those albums. So a lot of things, SoundScan had taken hold in 92. It started giving us the information that we needed so that you could really start developing a plan, and then understanding how with BDS and everything that was going on, you could sit down with artists and talk to them about first single, second single, third single, fourth single, why you want this one, why you don't want this one. And there was a relationship and a trust that we built together about our performance and honoring what they had done musically. And then I think, one of the things that happened to us too was Renee Bell joining us. And when Renee came in, we built an outstanding A&R department. And it was not just the A part, it was the art part, because the songs came in. I mean, there isn't an artist that we can talk about that I'm not going to point to a copyright. Obviously we were controlling 35 to 40% of the singles chart and probably 30% of the album chart for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. I mean, sometimes we were higher than that. You remember we were always fighting them out. We could be 4 of the top 7 records, and who was going to go to 1? How many number 2s did Kenny have?
That's right. Yeah. I would love to count that.
Yeah.
At least a dozen.
Yeah.
Number 2s.
Kenny would go, well, can't you move them? And I'd go, I'm not moving Alan Jackson, at 5 o'clock somewhere. I don't have the power to do that. I mean, the thing's selling, or books and done only in America. There were songs, and I think that's one of the things that I don't see today. We're loaded up with data, but at that point, you knew when the consumer was engaged. And today, when I look at the chart, I see a handful of songs that are really streaming in our format. And then I see a lot of people in a very narrow band. And so we used to, if you remember, fight in those promotion meetings about, you got to get off this record. We need to make room for something else. And today it's just, I look at the format and I go, it's LaGuardia on a Friday night. Everything's lined up and it's going to land. You're going to land the plane 4 weeks from now. You'll go number 1. 5 weeks from now, you'll go, and everybody's got it worked out. And it's just crazy.
And Kenny was, he was always like, I don't feel like this record's working. I think we should move on.
The great thing about Kenny was, I'll talk about him, and I'll talk about Alan for a second too. Kenny never argued about he wrote something. It was always best song wins. And he wanted his fans to be engaged. And so we would go through, you were in a lot of those situations where we'd sit down and go, hey, this works or this doesn't work. And he'd go, okay. And there was trust. And I still think that's essential between everything that's going on in town, that the artist has that trust with you. Alan was another one too. He might be a redneck, was out there and we were just rocking on that record. And then where were you? Nancy Russell called me and said, come on over to the studio. And I heard that. And Bobby Craig was with me. And I looked at him and said, we got to get off the other one and come with this one. And, Bobby said, I'm in, and we had to convince Alan. He goes, you like that? It was like, in fact, we said to Alan came in, he wasn't in the room when we were listening to the playback on a couple of the songs. And Alan came in and we said, Alan, we were tearful about the song. He just turned around and walked out. He didn't want to hear anything about that. I'm on that record, but he got with the program and understood what needed to do, what needed to happen. And if you remember that performance, he was, he was emotional that night, and we didn't have the album ready. And so we were racing to get that damn thing done. But those are the moments you just sit there and go, God almighty, this is history, and you were in the room.
That guy, what a poet.
Yeah.
And such an incredible writer. And that song, America is hurting so much, and that song in a completely non-political way sort of helped to heal the country, and that was an amazing performance.
I'll tell you 2 things. One, there's the Bourgeois, our general manager and chief promo domo there. came into me and he said, Joe, Z100 in New York wants to play this record on the pop station, one of the biggest pop stations in the country. And I said, what's stopping him? He said, steel. He said, can you get Alan to take the steel off? I looked at Butch and I said, Butch, I'm good at what I can do, but there's no way in hell he's going to do that. He said, just, it's Z100, man. Come on. You get Z, you get me. You know, everybody's going to come on board. I said, I'll make the phone call. So I called Alan and I said to him, I said, Alan, we got a shot to go pop with this record if you'll take the steel off. And he said, I kind of like the steel. Click. It didn't stop Butch from going on and do what Butch did, which was always magical. And, we got that record going. He, when I talked to him about that record, one of the things I was going to tell you is we did the Grammys because I remember fighting with Walter Miller because Walter wanted to figure out how to cut the song. Not Walter Miller, who was doing the Grammys. Yeah.
We went blank. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes.
We just went blank. He called up and we had gone through this with Walter when on the CMAs. Walter wanted to cut the song. And I said, where do you cut the damn thing? Well, now here we are 5 months later. The record is huge. We've sold 1 million and something copies. And he comes in, he says,
Ken Ehrlich.
And he said, can you cut the song? And he said, Ken, where do you want to cut it? Can't do it. We get the full song on there. Alan walks out, does the song. You could tell most people in that room had never heard it. That song was massive everywhere. It was on TV. Everybody was picking up clips and playing it. The video was on. Most of America had never heard that song. And that night, people stood up. I remember Mary J. Blige was one of the first persons to stand up in the room.
Incredible. I see in the chat that Butch is actually joined on this. So
got a minute,
he's
Butch?
out there.
That was Butch's. Remember the Butch expression used to come in and go, you got a minute, Joe? What problem do we have now? I have to tell you, it was so much fun. I mean, because Butch and I went around the world. We went to Australia one time for 72 hours with Martina. And it was like, you fly across the world with somebody, you kind of get to know them. And we had so much fun. And we went to an international meeting. We were in Switzerland, and Butch and I, we had not been to bed. We had been up late because they used to do their showcases at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Butch and I are listening to something on the face, and Butch is really rocking his head. And so finally I tap him on the shoulder. We're like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We've been in this goddamn tent for, I don't know, 6 hours. And I said, are you loving this or trying to keep yourself awake? And he just looks back at me and, Butch's smile like, yeah, I don't give a shit about this, but I can't, if I just stop moving, I'm going to fall over. Kind of thing.
Well, that was such a great decade. And, that's when Arista joined us. So you kind of have to unite another staff, new artists, and you just did an amazing job because Alan had hits, Brooks and Dunn had hits, and they came in and maybe they were at a plateau, but you guys all got together and just like there is more left in the tank.
Yeah.
And Brooks and Dunn just exploded again. Yeah. And I really want to talk about the song Believe. That was just such a moment. And were there questions about, was that song too religious to put out at country radio?
It was more too long.
Too long.
We were in the, well, you remember the rooms. I remember Butch, poor Butch was getting all the short end of the stick sometimes because you'd go, Butch knew, I mean, yes, I'm a promo guy, but I know what sells. And so, it was one of those things where you kind of went out and said, okay, yeah, it's a ballad. Everybody was, oh God, not a ballad. Oh God, please, none of the ballad. And Ronnie and Kix had given us some up-tempo records off that record that were incredible.
Right.
But we were sitting there, and I remember it was Alan Brown who, in the meeting, we were talking about it, and Bobby was not a fan of putting it out because it was 4 minutes and 32 seconds or whatever the heck it was. And all of us felt the same way about the song. It was, how do you get it across the finish line? And Alan said, well, if you don't come with this now, when? And this would be a good time because, you can probably work your magic and get it on the CMAs and all that kind of stuff. And, I remember talking to Butch and saying, let's go for it. And I just saw across the chat, Butch came out
I
and he
saw that.
said, the song never tested at radio. I mean, but I used to go in to see Bobby every week and go, you see this? You see SoundScan? Went from 15,000 to 20,000 to 25,000. He goes, Joe, this is a bitch. I said, Bobby, that's what we get paid for, is this. And it was. I think Butch may remember, but I don't think we got maybe number 8 or something. And then it wound up winning single and song of the year, both the ACMs and the CMAs. Oprah put it on her show. Dr. Phil put it on. Every time they performed the damn thing, sales popped up. You got instantaneous feedback. I know we talk about everything today is in real time. That was real time for us. Those were big numbers.
And the song still resonates. I mean, for
Yeah.
me, and I think a lot of people, that was the biggest, best, most incredible performance from the CMAs. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. And
Renee Bell introduced Ronnie to Craig Wiseman, and the two of them with their backgrounds came up with that song.
right. Just yeah,
And
incredible.
we which just came back on here and said one more week, and that's exactly it. We overstayed our welcome, no doubt about it, but that record was working. And then, which will probably confirm this, but probably a year later, it started to test. And that was always the problem that we had. We used to pay for services that would tell us how these records were going to test them. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Did you play the right snippet?
Yeah, it's a copyright, and that's the basis of country music.
Absolutely. And then, man, Carrie Underwood joins in 2005, and she comes in from Idol. So the record's half Arista and Clive, and
Clive made half
country,
and,
right?
Yeah, because she and I met, and she said, I don't want to make a pop record. She says, it's nothing against pop music. I'm a country singer. So I went to, at that time, Walt Schmidholz, who was my boss, and I said, look, she wants, it's the artist. How do we satisfy the artist? And Clive he had to be negotiated with, but we split the record. And Renee and I flew up to play songs and played him Jesus Take the Wheel. And he went, I don't get it. Before he cheats, I don't get it. But we went on our merry way and did our half, and he did his half. They tried to work it at pop. Nothing ever came out. And of the 6 sides we recorded, we had 5 number ones with Before He Cheats and, Jesus Take the Wheel, and then, Mama. And I mean, it was just wasted. I mean, it was history at that point. And then she went out and opened for Kenny. That was her first tour.
Oh, okay. And Kenny, man, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, her first live performance, because I walked up to her and I said, she was at Music Fest, and Phil Vassar brought her on. And before she went on, I said, well, this is like old hat to you. She said, nope, never done this live, done to a TV audience, but I've never performed live like this. So that was her first show in the stadium.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, she was unbelievable live. She kicked ass out there, and she had a great sense of humor. But that was fun making that record.
Yeah, she really does have a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
She's a lot of fun. Well, and we can't leave this decade without talking about Kenny Chesney, because you guys really did plant those seeds in the 90s. The fans know it. He's selling records. He's selling tickets. The industry is still not on board, and there was just everybody gets together and focuses and makes the industry realize this guy this is it, and he explodes. And he just announced today he's the first country artist who's going to be at the Sphere. I mean, so what a ride!
Yeah, well, he's been working on that content for 6 months since the last tour. Because obviously we knew this was going to happen. So, but yeah, and I think, as you remember, that was a rough ride. We'd have a hit, we wouldn't have a hit. We'd have a top 10, we wouldn't have a hit. But each album, we kept increasing the sales, and he was doing much better live than he was doing on record. I remember that meeting we had in Colorado. I Want to Know How Forever Feels was the record I was about to play, but I put that word out, if we don't get this shit together, boy, Kenny's going to be gone. And everybody kind of went, what? How can that happen? You can't do that. Okay, I'll play along. And that song and the motivation, then we never look back. And I mean, what kind of great partner he is, and Clint was, and he is still to this day. I mean, it was a team that all worked together, and we all lost a lot of brain cells together. And I remember Butch and I were on the plane when we were doing those jet tours around the radio stations, promising to take the artist back. And we came into Phoenix, I believe, and we walked into the radio station, and we walked in, and the assistant there said, "Oh, I love this album." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And she named one or two songs, and Butch and I have been talking to him about then this the next single, and he wanted an up-tempo single. And he looked at me, he said, "You set this up. You set this up." And so I went, we just got here. How could I set anything up, And of course, they wound up becoming the next singles. And he was on stage somewhere, and he came right over to me. He told me, he said, "I told you this was a goddamn hit. Don't you remember that?" Kidding along.
I remember we would always get together and have the setup meetings before the album, and everybody had their plan together. And it was like, this is a lot. And everybody presented their plan, and Kenny agrees to everything. He's like, "I'm kicking my own ass here."
That's right. That's exactly right. But he did it. I mean, and that was the great thing I think about that period of time with all of us, is that we had the trust of the artists. We delivered. Everybody worked their ass off. And as Butch will testify, and you will too, if people weren't working, they were gone.
Yeah.
We did not have baggage. People did. I remember Butch telling one of the guys that was running a department, he was bitching and moaning about something. And Butch said to him, he said, "Man up. What are you doing here?" He said, "Either you're on or you're out." And that's the way everybody was. We were all in together. It was the 19 or 90 Musketeers, and the artists felt that, it was a welcoming situation. The post CMA parties was the place to be. It was, for us, that was the golden era. It really was.
It really was. It really was. And then in the middle of the decade, you guys, we merged with Sony, and again, we're joined by some new staff members and some new artists, Gretchen and Montgomery Gentry and Miranda Lambert, who at that point had never even had a #1 single. And people knew who she was, but she still hadn't really connected at the radio. And then Liar becomes her first #1 single.
And the story behind that one is that Miranda was conditioned based on her prior management, not Marianne, not to trust the label and not to trust radio. And so she'd give us 3 sides and say, "Well, pick from this." And we never really got to hear the album until later on. And so we were not doing, we didn't really have a track record. And so she came in to see me and said, "Look, I got a tour and I got people to support. I'm going to let you hear the sides. And here, please tell me which one of these things can be a hit, but I'm trusting you." And I said to her, "Okay, I'll do that if you let me pick the next one, because you're kind of forcing me to this place." And so we went, Jimmy Rector came in and said, "White Liar is the one." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "We're going to get this." And, Butch, Jimmy, and the staff, they delivered that multi-week #1. And then the next record, because we did the show at the Ryman, and House That Built Me, people had never heard it, and they came out of their chairs. I remember Taylor was up there sitting with us, and all. And the next record came, and she said, "Well, no, I got a tour. I need an up-tempo record." And I called Marianne. I said, "Remember the agreement?" And of course, House That Built Me became Song of the Year, the album of the year, blah, blah, blah. But what a truly great artist. You never knew what you were getting, but man, it was always going to be great.
And she did the same buy-in that everyone did. Everybody was in it for the right reasons, right? And just to win, and just let's do this.
Yeah,
so it was such a
good. No. I mean, it was, as you know, we were all together in Italy, a couple of months ago. I mean, it's all smiles, and the memories are all great.
They sure are. So I mean, incredible decade. So we survived. So you get up that morning, January 1st, 2010, you stretch, you pee, and you think,
I
I'm
think
going to resign as
they were
chairman.
reverse order. I
Well, they
peed
reverse
first
that.
and
You
then
get up, you
stretched.
pee, you stretch, and then you think, okay, I'm going to resign as chairman. Well, what led to that? What did you wake up call was there for you? You just thought I've given enough here.
Well, Ralph wanted me to sign another 5-year deal.
Mm.
And I couldn't see myself doing this 5 more years. And part of that was personal because my parents had moved to Nashville. They were pretty close to being late 80s and early 90, and they were not all in good health. I had not spent any time with my grandson growing up. I'd fly him to shows and I'd see my daughter and my grandson at shows and not, or a holiday. And it's like, okay, I've done all this. And, you just spent the last hour going through the artists that I was fortunate enough to work with. And I didn't see those I've been to the top of the mountain before.
Yeah.
And I knew what it felt like. And I didn't see getting to the top of the mountain again being as fulfilling. And that's more musically at that point. And I just, we had just been merged again wholly to Sony, and Sony was completely different than working for Bertelsmann. And I had gone through, I think I counted it up, I had 22 different bosses during my career in terms of work. And I just was like, you know what? I don't care. I was willing to walk on broken glass and eat fire in order to do what I wanted to do. Butch had left, the staff was changing, times were changing, and I needed to change. And to be honest with you, I didn't see the purpose of a 60-something-year-old guy. Of course, now we've gotten older than that running labels because I think it should be handed off.
Right.
And I just said to Rolf, I'm done. And, I gave him the 6 months, and he took over the succession program, and I was out of it at that point. And I was supposed to consult for 2 years. And halfway through my first year, I called the council of New York and said, I'm out at the end of the first year. I don't want to do this. So
yeah, never look back.
Yeah. And then I started devoting my time to CMA and the foundation and, the mayor and Abe's Garden and all the stuff that I got involved in.
Entrepreneur Center, Cumberland Board, Pinnacle Board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn more. I believe totally in learning, and I wanted to participate, but I also wanted to give back. And to me, the CMA and the foundation was about giving back. The town had given me so much and really didn't need to. But, I felt that was the right way for me to use my expertise and my time. And then I wanted to learn more about the city and give back in that way. And so I got involved in that. And then the charitable causes, Vanderbilt Children's, and then, of course, Franny passing.
Leadership music.
Yeah.
Yes.
All that
Franny
stuff.
passing.
Yeah. So it just, everything. Then COVID, your wife passes and you go into COVID for 3 years. It's like, okay, that's enough. So, and then the first couple. Good.
Go ahead. No,
Well,
please.
the first couple of years, I kept getting, Joel Katz calling up and going, "Hey, this guy wants you to take over this label. No, meet with so and so, and they're going to fund." And I went, "I've worked for the greatest group of artists in country music history for the most part. I mean, are there great artists now? Yes, but there were a shitload of them that I work with. I value all the time and the lessons because I did learn from all those people involved."
And we learned from you, Joe. I mean, you are just such a natural born mentor. You love to do it, and you just do it for everyone. I mean, I would absolutely not be here if I had not gone to work for you. And
thank you.
The lessons that I learned for you, and you took time with everyone, not just me, to help them be the best that they can be. And a lot of leaders don't have that quality, and it's just innate in you, Joe, and it's amazing. And I mean, all that leads up to rightly so, deservedly so, being a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Well, as you know, because you were there, I mean, I still, I still don't believe it. I mean, I know I've seen the plaque, I kind of know it's real, but I mean, and it's not something you ever aspire to, that's not something that was ever in my mind. So it was the greatest honor of my life. Um, and it's still every time I go into the Hall of Fame, for the new inductions, and to be in that class picture, it's an emotional moment to just kind of go, I'm in the room, Oh God, yeah. It's a very,
Yeah.
very special honor. Yeah.
And by my count, which is probably inaccurate. I mean, you have like helped have 12 artists that you have helped that are now in the Hall of Fame, not even to mention the ones that are going to go in, like Kenny Chesney and Martina and Carrie. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, it's such a special, uh, the Hall of Fame, with the connection with the CMA and also just the city. I mean, it's a spectacular place to go. And I told somebody the other day that was new to town, in the label business, I said, you need to take your staff down there. They need to sit
absolutely.
through the history of what this town has been built on, because we have we have such an important place in American history, musical history. And I think that, people need to understand where it all came from. I mean, Ken Burns did a spectacular job, but when you go through that museum, you really do feel America and everything that's happened. And I think the artists are always the ambassadors. We're behind the scenes, but yeah, well, thank you
And
for the
this
compliments.
format, it's so you deserved. And this what was a niche format is country is mainstream, right? I mean, it's unbelievable what
Well,
has
that's
happened.
one of the things that really caused me to get pissed off is, when I was going back and forth to New York in my early days, and I'd go up there. And when I was up there, I was kind of respected. I wasn't a senior guy, but I was respected enough where I could get somebody's attention. And then, we started going up there and asking for things. Then they going, for what? For the artists in Nashville. Who gives a shit? I'm sorry. And again, I got fired up about, well, you know what? The hell with you.
Yeah.
We're going to show you. And I mean, it was building blocks for a decade of going to take little pieces, getting accounts on board, getting stations on board. Butch was in the field when we used to be crossing those records over. I mean, all that, how much more can we get out of this? Can we take an Alabama to pop radio and succeed? Hell yeah. And there was a string of records and that opened up. And then people would start to say, well, yeah, I'll carry an Alabama record. Oh, you will? Well, will you carry a Kenny Chesney a couple of years later? Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
the artists open up the doors. The Dolly Partons of the world open up the doors. Here you come again, 9 to 5. Islands in the Stream. It became your leverage, but we had a fight for that. Nobody gave it to us, and I think we need to realize what made us special were those artists and those songs. They were characters. There was there was something in each of them, and the way they chose or wrote their songs, you understood what a catalog was, and that's what the town is built on, is the catalogs that they developed. And you can hear those songs as we went to Oktoberfest, and they're
Yeah.
playing our old
Country
catalog.
Road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Country Road, here we go. Okay, yeah, and you go, oh yeah, I got that one. So I mean, that traveled around the world, and that was a great way for country music to be introduced. The Johnny Cashes of the world, the Dolly Partons.
It is an incredible history that has been built, and I know you still go into shows. Like I think last year you went to Taylor, Jelly Roll,
Yeah,
Miranda Vegas
Stapleton.
residency, Stapleton.
Yeah,
So I know you're still out there,
yeah.
seeing what's happening.
But you named all good names, boy. It was fun to
Yeah,
be there,
yeah, absolutely.
and also not to be responsible for anything.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything. Well,
And
Tom, any quick questions in the chat?
Guys, I could listen to 5 hours of this, and most of the commentary in the chat would echo that. Joe, this has been fabulous. I knew it was going to be awesome. This has been even better than I had hoped. When I sent out the announcement about this event, I said if Nashville had a Mount Rushmore, that Joe Galante would be the first person enshrined. And I guarantee you every person that listened to this today would be nodding their head in agreement. Wes is going, uh-huh.
No doubt.
Well, I'm glad we don't have a Mount Rushmore, and I would not want to be on that, but let's just move on to the other things.
Well, I do just have one kind of big question, and that is you touched on this a little bit. If you were in the business today, roll, you're now 45 years old and you're running Sony Nashville, what does it look like in terms of signing an artist? In other words, it's not just instinct anymore. There's data and money. And I mean, how do you handle that transition?
You know, hmm, depends on what you're chasing. I think for me, still the idea of those artists that build a catalog is essential, and that's built through songs. Um, what we have as a business today that's built on market share, and pieces of things are more important than actually having the whole because it's more a current business in that sense. People worried about, what's going on with the data. And I look at, I'm still following the numbers and I can see, the buzz deals go through and I see a first single, sometimes a second single, and then there's no third and fourth. And then the second album, nobody really gives a damn about. And even some of the people that are successful, when I look at the streaming numbers, which is the only measurement you really have because I can't value the radio chart the way I used to, I don't see the numbers there. I see popularity, but popularity doesn't mean longevity and it doesn't build a catalog. And I think that, and I understand the game that the labels have to play, especially with everybody coming in from both coasts, because in a lot of cases, their ground isn't as fertile as our ground is. But I'm not a farmer, but I remember reading something about when you kind of take too many crops out of the soil, you kind of lose the nutrients and it becomes difficult to farm. And I think that we're in danger of that because I see more artists signed to labels today than anybody can manage. And I talk to more people at labels who say, I can't handle all this. And nothing becomes original. It becomes popular. It may test, but doesn't have the longevity. So to me, it's not about the market share, and it's really about finding those artists and taking your time. Now, does somebody have the luxury of time? I don't know the answer to that. So your question, I can't really answer. Am I walking in bankrolled? How is this 45-year-old guy going about this? Is it my money? Is it somebody else's money? But aside from that, I think the point is really about how do you really build that catalog? Because at the end of the day, that's our value. And I think that, it's interesting to me, a lot of the deals that now that there are people are stars are become licensing deals. And you can take your catalog someplace else. And that's going to change. Doesn't change the value of a Sony catalog or a Universal catalog because of those old deals. You can't move any of that. That's there. It's not going anywhere. But the George Jones song, who's going to fill their shoes? I think that's a question that people that really care about this and aren't just worried about. I mean, everybody worries about a paycheck. Obviously, you all do, but really care about it. Who's going to fill their shoes? I mean, there are certainly people like Eric and Miranda and you can look at Luke Combs and you can see what more. I mean, they've done that, but there are a lot of records that go up and down that chart that you go, man, nobody gives a damn about that. You say 5 o'clock somewhere and people know that expression. You want me to go through the chart and start naming the titles and tell me how many of these things are going to be spoken about as what the country talks about? People do listen to what we do, and I think we have their attention. I just hope that we can keep it by making the right kind of records along the way. And I'm not saying it's easy. I know it's not easy, and I know the political forces that are going on in terms of from the coasts and how their mission is different than our mission to a certain degree. But finding those artists and it just everything can't be shiny. And just because it shows up doesn't mean these people are vetted and ready to go. I'm sorry. I may lose everybody that was on the chat at this point, but
No,
the reality is I honestly don't feel that there's enough of that, copyright forever. Believe It wasn't a number one record. And I mean, we learned along the way, there are just as many records that never make number one that are more impactful than the ones that are one. But this town, which is built on the songwriter, we celebrate number one records more than we think about what the impact is on the business in total.
I've always wanted to do a show on here about songs that should have won Grammys that never did.
Yeah.
I think we could be here all day talking about that. Two quick questions, Joe. Who is an artist or maybe the artist that you really took a chance on despite everyone around you saying, do not do this, do not do this, you can't do this, and you did it? You said, hold my beer, and a superstar happened. Anybody come to mind?
Judds.
Awesome.
I signed the Judds, and the guy I was working for, nobody would have known before Netflix, but was Jose Menendez. And he called me, and I had sent him the music just because that's what you're supposed to do. And he said, you shouldn't do this. And Jose, as you can tell from the show, was not meek in any way, shape, or form. It was a little stronger than that. And I said to him, well, I'm going to do this. And if it doesn't work, you want to fire me, you can fire me. He says, oh, I will. But obviously that didn't happen. Yeah.
Same question. Who's an artist that you really looked at but passed on that became a mega star? One that got away, or you let get away?
I guess that would come back to Taylor. I mean, we did the initial demos on her. She was 15. But there were two things that happened after because the records that we had, she was ready to make her record, but we were not ready to make a record. The two things that happened that changed the course of history there were, one was Liz Rose, and two was MySpace. And those were pretty powerful forces that got through that. And then, of course, you add Scott, who believed just like I believed in so many people. And the couple years in between her leaving and her getting into that place, again, people see Taylor today, but that was not instantaneous there. It took a moment too. But she deserves everything because she worked her ass off, and she could run for office and win. She's that kind of person.
Agreed. Well, gentlemen, we've gone over time, and like I said, I could keep you all here all day long. Wes, thank you very much for doing this and for conducting a marvelous interview. I knew you would. And Joe, like I said, Jesus, just what a career.
Well, Wes, thank you again. This has been one of the more pleasant trips down memory lane. Although the last time we were up at the Cape there, we were sitting there, Wes and I were on the deck drinking and just playing music, going back and forth, just the two of us. And it was a fun time. It was a beautiful day.
That was a blast.
Yeah. But thanks again, man. I appreciate everything. I love you, brother.
Thank you, Joe. You too.
Great stuff. To the audience, you got yourself a real treat today, as I promised. Let's not lose thoughts and prayers for our friends in Los Angeles. We're all
Amen.
Too many friends touched by that. Give money, give time, give a shoulder to cry on. Be nice to each other. And we will see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.